Dobroveče i dobrodošli na Akademiju umetnosti. Pozdravljam vas večeras kad imamo jednu divnu priliku da ugostimo jednog izuzetnog pijanistu Đulијуса Dрејка. Zahvaljujući saradnji Akademije umetnosti i Fondације Лаза Костиќ, pozdravljam profesoricu Marinu Milić-Radović, koja je ovu priliku iskoristila da dan kada je Fondacija napravila program u Matici Srpskoj, omogući vama susret sa pijanistom Đulијуsom Dрејkom, sa kojima će razgovarati profesor Milan Miladinović, šef katedre za klavir. Ja se uvek posebno radujem kada na Akademiji imamo priliku da studenti, sem susreta svakodnevnog sa svojim profesorima, imaju priliku da čuju i one ljude koji su gosti i vansredijski umetnici u svetu muzike i u svetu likovne i dramske umetnosti. Svaki put tada vi, apelujem, iskoristite priliku da slobodno komunicirate i da postavljate pitanja. Znam da je to kod nas u Novom Sadu retka praksa, ali ja svaki put apelujem, iskoristite priliku. To vam je prilika manje više svaki put tokom studija. Jednom u životu se desi da sretnete čoveka. Teško će se desiti da sretnete nekog 2 puta, tako tokom studija kad imate priliku da ovakvi umetnici gostuju. Tako da, uz srdačnu dobrodošlicu Đulијусу Dрејку, ja vam želim ugodno veče i uživajte u onom što će biti tema ovog razgovora. Hvala vam.
I'm very honored to have you here as a guest, and it's a great honor for our academy, of course, and it's always to have a great artist, and there are many questions that can be of a large interest of especially our students who are here present. So basically I would start asking you about you as an artist, some basic questions like, I know it sounds a bit like traditional questions, but I think it would be very interesting for our students to know about your beginnings and how did you decide to trace your career in as a collaborative pianist.
I was a musical child, and so my parents sent me to a music school, specialist music school, and I worked very hard because I loved playing the piano more than doing anything else at school. So I worked hard on my solo piano repertoire, and I had a very ambitious piano teacher. But when I went to the Royal College of Music when I was 18, so I did that very intensely, the solo repertoire, from about the age of 12 till 18. But I always felt, though I loved the music, and though I loved learning the pieces, when it actually came to performing them in front of people, I felt uncomfortable. I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin, and that wasn't just because I wasn't used to performing people, because I'd been going up on a stage because I was at the school. Every week of my life I was doing a concert of some sort. So I was used to playing to people, but I didn't quite feel comfortable. And then when I didn't realize that until I went to the Royal College of Music, and in the first semester, you were required to play chamber music with your peers, other students who played other instruments who had come to the Royal College of Music for their first year. And for the first time, I played with a clarinetist, and I played with a cellist, and I played with a violinist. And in that first week at the Royal College, I thought, this is what I want to do. I don't want to play solo. Because suddenly I felt quite comfortable, and I loved having that communication with another person on stage, listening to them, they were listening to me. Somehow, it was just it was right for me. And from that point, when I was 18, after that, I didn't have any desire to play solo piano. I went through college and did what I had to do, but I concentrated on chamber music.
It's a very sincere answer and very deep, actually, because, as you know, most of young pianists want to have solo piano career, and many of them doesn't give much attention, actually, to chamber music or to co-repetition of singers. And
I think they should, because I think The piano repertoire is one of the greatest repertoires, but it's rivaled, for instance, by the song repertoire, the Lieder and French song repertoire. You have some of the greatest music that Schubert wrote, some of the greatest music that Schumann wrote, greatest music that Brahms wrote, the greatest music that Fauré wrote, the greatest music that Debussy wrote, the greatest music that Ravel wrote. It goes on, the long list, because often these great composers, if they were really loved song, they wrote some of their most intimate and profound music for voice and piano. So if you do concentrate in that world, you are going to play a wonderful repertoire. The only other repertoire perhaps that rivals it is the repertoire of chamber music with piano. All the cello sonatas, all the violin sonatas, all the trios, if you go into the world of piano trios. That's another amazing repertoire where you're sitting at a piano playing this great music, but you're always sitting at a piano playing this great music with somebody else. And that's what I loved about it, whether it's with a singer, or whether it's with a violinist, or whether it's as part of a piano trio. It's the chamber music part. It's a bit like the difference between being a solo violinist and then deciding you want to be a violinist in a quartet. It's a different thing. Instead of going out there as the soloist, you're going out there and making music with some other people who become very close to you, and you're making. That's another thing that's very different. Instead of going out there and playing as one instrument, you are going out there and you're making a sound together, like in a piano, like in a quartet. And I often think that the best thing I can achieve working with a cellist or a violinist or a singer is for people to hear it as one sound, like a string quartet is one sound, not four separate sounds.
And speaking about that, not what you prefer, but what's the difference, for example, when you follow singers or when you play with other instruments?
I passionately believe that vocal chamber music is chamber music, because the only difference, it seems to me, the voice is an instrument, you're working with the sound of the voice, but there's one very big difference, and that is that when you're working with singers, you have words involved. And the meaning of the words, it's an extra dimension, because before that song was written, a poem was written, almost always. And the composer almost always read that song, that poem, and was inspired to set it to music. So when you work with a singer, you are working also, as they are, on the language of the poetry and the meaning of it, and what it is in the meaning of the poetry that has inspired the music. So it's another dimension that is added to the music-making process, so which I find very inspiring.
Extra layer in the score itself.
Yeah, and that's always fascinating. I'm not a very good linguist, but by any means, but I do love the sound of other languages. So I love that, working with someone singing in French or singing in German or singing in Serbian. Just the sound of it, apart from the meaning, adds another element to the sound of the music, I find.
Can we just go back a little bit, because you said that when you were 18 you decided, so that's quite early actually. Yeah. And so at first you were...
But I think I was able to do it at 18 because I had been playing solo so intensely from the age of 7. And certainly from 12 to 18, I did nothing else except play solo piano, hours and hours every day. So I'd had a very intense period earlier than most people.
And so you start with your peers, with your student colleagues, but when did you start to have your first professional engagements, and do you remember some extraordinary first artist extraordinary that you have worked with?
Well, I started working, in chamber music from about the age of 18 to 21. And then, when I was 20, one of the slightly younger people at the school I've been at, the music school, won a big prize, the BBC Young Musician of the Year, which gave him an enormous amount of concerts all around the country. And he asked me to play for these concerts. And so when I left music college at 21, I was offered all these concerts to go around with him. Nicholas Daniel, who was here, a wonderful oboist. And that was a great start for me, but it also stopped me going abroad, because otherwise I would have gone and studied abroad. I could have gone and studied abroad, but instead I decided, sometimes I regret it, but instead I decided I would do all these concerts. And when I was doing the concerts all around the country for the next 3 years or so, I learned an incredible amount about just what it is to do concerts and what's involved with concerts. Much more than I think I could have learned any other way. So I had a lucky break, but it meant I was playing professionally from the age of 21. And I didn't really have any further study, which at one point caught up with me, but that's how I started.
And can you tell us, it would be also, I think, very interesting, so the repertoire that you prefer?
Well, when I was
if it's possible to answer this question with your such a broad repertoire that you have.
Well, as I say, at 18, I decided I just wanted to do chamber music, so I stopped learning any solo works that I didn't have to learn for my exams, and I started learning the chamber music repertoire, which is enormous, and I concentrated on that with my colleagues until I was about 25 or 24, 25, just doing that. And then, I don't know how it happened, I went to a song recital. I'd always gone to song recitals, but I can remember there just came a time, I went to a song recital and Geoffrey Parsons was playing the piano. And I can't remember which famous singer it was, but I can remember looking at Geoffrey Parsons and thinking that it must be wonderful to do that, to play a piano at that high level, because he played at a very high level, and have this wonderful music with the words. And so I started getting interested in songs, and I with Nicholas Daniel, we formed a little trio to go around the music clubs in Britain, which was him, me, and always a singer or an actor, and we had a theme of animals, and we made a fun program. But it introduced me for the first time to singers. And since then, I have been more or less obsessed with the song repertoire, which is a long time now. Yeah, because of the words, because of that extra element.
And can you tell us, because it's such an important thing, I mean, obviously to have, you have enormous affinity to collaborate with other musicians, but sometimes you have to work with very strong personalities, and how do you deal when something is maybe...
Well, it's interesting. I think easy. If you're going to do what I do, you have to get on with people. You have to be you have to find it quite easy to get on with people, but you also have to be quite a strong personality yourself. Otherwise, you'll get pushed down all the time. So you have to stand up for yourself and be your own person, but also be open to being friendly. And on the whole, people I've worked with have become my friends, and it's a very nice relationship. Two or three times it's not gone well, but that's out of hundreds. So,
do you have some anecdotes maybe to share with us? You don't need to mention names, but
no, I can't think of anything immediately at the moment. But no, I did have some. I've had some tricky times. I had quite early on. I had a horrible time with the manager of Victoria de Los Angeles, because I was very honored. I was asked to do one of her very last concerts, and it was in Aldeburgh at the Aldeburgh Festival. And I was traveling to the rehearsal the day before, And Aldborough is about 2 hours out of London, and there was terrible, really terrible traffic. There had been some accident, and I was stuck in a traffic jam, and I rang it was the days before mobile phones, that's how long it was, ago it was, and I found the telephone box, and I stopped the telephone box, and I rang up the Aldborough Festival, and I said, you must tell Victoria de Los Angeles that I'm going to be late for the rehearsal. And this is, you know, me, totally unknown me, keeping Victoria de Los Angeles, one of the most famous singers of the last 50 years, waiting for her rehearsal. And they said, when they were there, they said, oh, well, we'll hand you over to her manager. And her manager was just sometimes you come across horrible human beings. He was just a horrible man. And he just said to me, well, what do you mean you're going to be late? Who are you to be late for Victoria de Los Angeles? So I said, oh, I don't know what I do. He said, well, you better not be late, otherwise you won't do the concert. And he put the phone down. And so that was a very unpleasant experience, but one of the very few. And when I got there very late, and she was absolutely fine. But he was just... He was a bully, I suppose, and he bullied me. So sometimes you can be in that position.
And it's important for students also to know that experiences can be sometimes very pleasant, sometimes not so pleasant, and to be prepared.
Yeah, but I think the most pleasure comes from working with people who are your peers. You know, it was a great experience to work with Victoria de Los Angeles because she's a singer I loved. But, you know, my real experiences of music making are with the people I grew up with. And for instance, I've just been on a tour in America with a wonderful Canadian baritone, Gerald Finley, and we've been working together since we were 28. And we're still working together now. So we're very close friends, and we're very close musical friends. And that I think is the best, that you find partners to work with who are more or less your own age, and you go through your careers together. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, yes, you'll have a chance to work with some great famous person. But mostly it's finding people who you like and you get on, and you make your careers, if you're lucky enough, you make your careers together.
Great, great. I would like to ask you, and to give my thanks, especially to Marina and to Fond Laza Kostиć, that bring you here to Novi Sad, and you made a wonderful recording and a concert today, and because of all this organization, you're here now with us. Can you tell something about your connection with the Lazа Kostиć Fond and through it with some Serbian composers that you made?
Well, it's all through Marina, really, because we are friends from when Marina was living in London a long time ago. In fact, we were discussing how we actually first met. We can't remember how we met. We think it was through a concert promoter called Erica Goddard. But we're going back a long way into the mists of time, so it's hard to tell exactly. But it was Marina who, in 1988, said, I want these two young musician friends of mine, Nicholas Daniel and Џулијус Dreјk, to come out here and do a concert for the inaugural concert, I think, just the start. Yeah. And we also did a concert in Belgrade. Yeah, that was all arranged by Marina.
400 concert,
Jubilee concert, that's right, yeah. And it's through Marina that I've stayed in touch with Serbian music, and on this occasion now playing new pieces by young Serbian composers and working with two very talented young Serbian singers. But it's all thanks to Marina's work and efforts. And it's been a great pleasure to come back. You've made such a fuss of me. I feel very spoiled.
Can you tell us something about you as a teacher? Because it's first of all, does it help in your professional career in a way that?
Yes, I think teaching is essential. I've always taught all my life. When I was young, I was teaching. I never taught small kids, but I taught beginner adults. I can remember driving all around London teaching beginner adults lessons to make pocket money, to make the money enough to live. So I've always taught all my life. And then at one point, I was invited to the Royal Academy of Music to work with the singers there. And then they changed it so that I was a professor working with the pianists. But there's never been a time when I wasn't teaching. And once I was teaching at the Royal Academy, then I was teaching young pianists who were doing more or less the same as me. And then about 12 years ago, a friend of mine, who actually had been a student of mine at the Royal Academy of Music, she was working in Graz in Austria, and she said, "You must apply for the job here in Graz, because there's a wonderful job. It's a half-time job, so you could do it. Graz is a wonderful place, and the German-Austrian system is, in my opinion, the best system. If you're a professional musician like myself who's going around doing concerts, it gives the opportunity to a musician to actually have a professorship which is so flexible, you can still do your concerts. Mm-hmm. In London, you can't do that. In London, if you're going to have a professorship, you have to be in London 4 days a week teaching. And that stops you going around doing concerts. But in Germany and Austria, if you have a half job, then you can do what I do, which is go once a month. I have a class for advanced pianists, masters and postgrad pianists who want to be song pianists. And then I go there every month for 4, maybe 5 days, and I teach them in the class. They give me a nice room to work in, and I can teach them any time I like for those 4 or 5 days. And then most of them don't live in Graz. They come from Vienna or Torino or wherever they live. And they also travel to Graz, like I do. And that's something that's been a great pleasure in the last 10 years or so, because before that, I was just teaching the little I could at the Royal Academy. And now I've got this regular thing, and I have a regular connection with those students. And but I think, I don't know if you find the same, I'm sure you do, but I find teaching is also the best lesson for myself. And when I am telling students what to do, I often say to myself, why don't I do that? You know, yeah. I look at them and I say, you're so clear what you have to do this. And then I think, well, that's what I should be doing. I'm not doing it. For instance, you've got to listen to every note that you play. And I am so aware that I don't do that. I'm saying to them, aren't you listening to what you're doing? And then I think, I'm not listening to what I'm doing either. Because piano playing is very difficult, or at least most of us find it very difficult. And it's a constantly demanding of you. The music is constantly requiring you to be better than you are and to do better than you can. Mm-hmm. So that's why I don't think if you're a pianist you get bored. It's too difficult.
Yeah. Mm. And can you compare, since you have worked in England and now you work in Austria as well? Mm. You already said something about the difference in the system itself, but can you compare students? And I mean, both schools are obviously very international.
Yeah, they are international. So, I mean, I've got, out of my 6 students, I think only one is Austrian. One is German. One is 2 are Italian. And one is Chinese American. So it's a very international. They could just as well go to London and study. I often say to students, but when I do master classes, sometimes people come up and say, where could I study with you? And I say, well, I suggest you apply to Graz. It's not easy to get in, but I suggest you do, because it's a real bonus if you live there, because you'll learn German. And that in the world of song is a real advantage.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I encourage them to come and study in Graz so that they can really get to grips with German. And one of the good things the German and Austrian Hochschules insist on is that you have to pass a German exam in order to be able to stay on the course. And so you really are required to sort it out. And I had one American student who refused to learn German, and for some reason, I don't know why, and they kicked her out in the end because you don't pass your German exam. In fact, it's just happened to me now. One of my students hasn't passed his German exam, so he can't study with me this semester. He's got to redo it, and then he can do the semester again, but he can't study until he's passed the exam, which I think is quite good.
Yeah, for sure. And what would be interesting also for our younger students, you know, can you tell something about the position of artists in today's world? This is maybe too general question and a tricky one, but in sense that what is happening with classical music in general, you know, like opportunities now. COVID made very difficult life for many artists, especially freelancers, and new media and possibilities. And
I think it is changing. I don't know. I mean, COVID is an exceptional case. I mean, it's been awful for all musicians like myself who are performing because we haven't been able to perform, as you all know. But I hope now that it's ending, and we'll look back and say those 2.5 years were extraordinary, and thank goodness things have got back to normal. I mean, my first start with COVID was I had a concert at La Scala, Milano, and I thought it was very strange when I arrived in Milan that there were so many police at the airport. But I'd heard about that there's something. This is in February 2020. And we did the rehearsal for the concert, and then I went and had a nice meal and went to the hotel, and the next day made my way to the concert, you know, to La Scala. It's always a big thing to do a concert at La Scala. And I was shown to my changing room and everything, and then I did the rehearsal on stage, and then I went for my little rest, which I have on the afternoon, and then someone knocked on the door, and it was the general manager of La Scala, and he said, the concert's cancelled. Everything in Milan is closed. That was February the 23rd, 2020. And really, I hadn't heard anything about it before. And from that point on, life was very difficult. But that's a separate thing. The story of how classical music has changed, I find that's a hard one to answer because I think it does vary from one country to another, though there are definitely certain things that seem to be the same all over Europe and America, which is that music in schools is not as important any longer. Children are not singing in class as much. They're not required to do music lessons. They're not given free music lessons in Britain anymore. And the arts are generally considered not as important as subjects like economics or mathematics that they will perhaps one day earn a living doing. And I think as a result of that, if children are not having access to classical music, they're not hearing it as I heard it at school and as my children heard it at school too, but we have connections with our local primary school, and I know it's a real problem, then I think it will become harder and harder for classical musicians to have an audience, because I think the audience comes from people who love music. Most people are exposed to music, not in the home necessarily, but at school, and I think it makes it very difficult. But I also feel that, in a way, classical music has a privileged place in Western culture. And, for instance, in Britain, we have a radio station, one of the BBC radio stations that's just devoted to classical music, which supports several orchestras, and which plays classical music and sponsors classical music and puts on concerts for classical music all the time. And I think that's a very privileged position. I mean, that's been there all my life, and it's now more threatened than it was, but I still feel that as a classical musician, we have a very, considering that it's an art form which isn't so easy for people, I think we get a lot of access and respect in a funny sort of way. So I think in many ways we're very lucky, but I think it's also under threat.
Yeah. Well, in a way, this is an optimistic.
Yes.
In a way that, I mean, pessimistic part is, of course, the role of music in society, which obviously needs to be strengthened in.
And I think it's from the schools. It's because of education. I mean, for instance, my colleague Christoph Bregadien, who's a wonderful German tenor, great leader singer, he said when he was singing 30 years ago, everybody knew all the poems, the famous poems he was singing, Erlkönig, An den Mond, I don't know, any of the very famous Lied. They had learned, they'd heard them in school, they'd sung them in school, and they'd studied the poems of Goethe and Schiller, and they knew the poems, and they could just recite the poems. And so you'd be singing to a German audience that knew the poems. And he said that's completely changed. They don't learn Goethe and Schiller in school any longer, unless they particularly take a literature. They don't sing Schubert in the schools anymore. So they don't know the songs. And he says that is where the danger is, because if you didn't hear that as a child, I don't think you're going to come back to it. Very likely you won't come to it as an adult.
Yeah, obviously, if you have an audience who have some ideas about what they will hear, the level of communication between artist and the audience is much higher, and expectations as well. But
yes,
the pleasure is that if you
touch it's something
the audience,
that it's been in their lives all their lives, I think, and school is vital for that.
And for the last question, just considering from pianistic perspective, obviously many here are pianists, and mostly students are pianists and singers. And I have a privilege now as a pianist to ask you basically for opportunities for job for pianists. Obviously, it's very difficult to have a solo career. It's very difficult to find a teaching post, especially in university. You have to have some extraordinary things done, winning of some important competitions, making CDs and everything. So you have to basically have some kind of career. But what are other possibilities? I mean, if you...
I don't think that's an easy question to answer, because I think if you choose the life of a musician, you're not really choosing... this maybe not be the answer that I should give or you want to hear, but in a way, if you choose the life of a musician, you're not choosing a life where there is a job. There isn't a job. Nobody needs another pianist. Nobody needs another singer, unfortunately. They do need another doctor, and they do need another nurse. And that is a job. What we do is something in the arts. Nobody needs another painter, and nobody needs another ballet dancer. So it's the same thing. If you choose something in the world of the arts, then you're going to have to find your own way and find a place for yourself in it. And there isn't a route. If you qualify as a doctor, then you go all the way through the route, and then you are then in the system. If you qualify as a lawyer, you're then in the system. But if you qualify as a musician, it's a bit like there's a circle of that, and you have to fight your way into the circle. And the way you fight your way into the circle is just wanting it a lot, getting better, and finding a way of earning a living while you do that. And that way might be, for instance, private teaching, or it might be working in the local concert hall and as an usher, or it might be anything that you do in order to pay the bills, but you're pursuing the life of a musician, trying to make your way, and of course it's very precarious.
But the privilege is that you work the job that you actually love the most. So this
yes,
is the
it
privilege.
is. I suppose it's what we would say is that there's one thing is a job, and the other thing is a vocation. And that means if you can make it work as a musician and you love it, then at least your reward is never going to be a lot of money, unless you're Placido Domingo or Daniel Barenboim. It's never going to be a lot of money, but your reward is you spend your life trying to get better at something that you love. And I think any sensible parent would say to their child, don't do that. Go and qualify as a lawyer or a doctor. But I'm very grateful that my father was a lawyer, and he never told me to go and qualify as a lawyer. So I'm very grateful that he didn't. To have the courage to do that, because I have a feeling he had no idea how precarious a life of a musician was, and that's why he didn't. I think it's a wonderful path, the path of a musician, but I also think it's very hard. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. In the next few minutes, we can have questions from the audience if somebody wants to.
They have to be in English, I'm afraid.
No?
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Ďuliјus. I'm here professor of collaborative piano. Here at the Academy, yes. There are many of my former students here,
Yeah.
as I can see. I would like to just take back to one of your first sentences that you said today. You have decided to be a chamber musician.
Yes.
Here we have a debate.
Yeah.
Whether the German lead is a chamber music or not.
Yeah.
There are many of us who play with singers and other instruments. We believe that any form of people who are playing together is chamber music.
Yes.
And for me, example, German lead was a revelation when I have discovered it.
Yeah.
I was not.
Me too.
Yes, it's just another world.
Yeah.
And I think I heard that you said it's most intimate form
Yes.
of chamber music, which I have felt the same.
Yes.
Absolutely the same.
Yeah.
Like the whispering.
Yeah.
Almost like you're hearing somebody mind inside of his head.
Yes.
Would you like to explain why do you think it's chamber music still, whether it's just a song, which I don't.
But I think I will explain. What I think is, though, you have to approach it. Everybody has to approach it from the point of view of chamber music. So that means your singer has got to think it's chamber music too. And if your singer thinks that actually it's all just them singing and you're in the background accompanying, then it's going to be very hard. So you have to find singers who want to make a partnership with you, and they also recognize that even if the Schubert song has got a very, for instance, simple piano part, simple in inverted commas because it's not hard to actually play it, but it's still, if they recognize that that actually is a vital part of how the song is going to work and be successful, then you can make chamber music. You can't make chamber music with a singer who just thinks it's all about them. It's not. I mean, it's not like singing arias. Yes, it's chamber music. So it takes two. It takes two to feel like that. And some of the not so nice experiences I've had has been with singers who weren't interested in chamber music. But the important thing is you find singers who are. And I think the new generation, younger singers, are much more open to that idea. I think it's old-fashioned now to think of a song recital as being a solo performance with somebody in the background. And that's, I mean, for instance, an example of that is that now, when I started all those years ago, the piano lid was up just a tiny little bit. And then sometimes we had it on half stick. But now, it's on full stick. Most of the concerts I do, the piano's on full stick. Because you have to, if you play the piano well, you can control how much noise the piano makes. Whether it's, I can drown a singer without any trouble at all with the piano lid down and a carpet on top of the piano. But I don't with the lid up either, because I control the piano. So that's an example, and the piano sounds much better when the lid is up. And another example is that most of the time now when I do a concert, which never happened before, I get the same size billing on the program. It says the singer's name and it says my name in the same size print. All my life it wasn't like that, and certainly for the whole generation before. And I looked at a program from Carnegie Hall, one of the last programs that Fischediskau gave at Carnegie Hall at the end of his career in about 1970, and Jörg Demus was playing the piano. Jörg Demus is one of the best pianists, I mean, an amazing pianist, I think. And he was amazing at playing songs. You can hear him on record with Fischediskau. He's absolutely fantastic. Fischediskau's name was like that, and Jörg Demus was just teeny, teeny. You could just see it there. And that was 1970. And, you know, a lot has changed from that time. And another sign of that change is that there are so many solo pianists who are seeking out singers to play concerts with. Leif Ove Andenes, Mitsuko Ishida, all these soloists are taking our jobs away from us because they all want to play songs too, because the repertoire is so wonderful. And the singers now are much more open to the idea that it's a partnership between two people.
Sorry, can I just ask? You said singing areas are different than singing songs.
Yeah.
But you are going to play with the Vecchio Polenzani and Joyce Di Donato.
Yeah, but I never play arias.
Do you feel difference when they sing songs apart from the singers?
Well, I would never play an aria with them on stage. They would I never play an aria. So if they do a recital with me, then it'll always be songs. So there are no arias. I mean, that's another thing that's changed. A song recital doesn't have arias in it. An aria recital is something you do with an orchestra. It's excerpts from opera. But, you know, I'm playing the piano in chamber music. My part was written by a great composer who is usually a pianist himself or herself, whether it's Clara Schumann or Johannes Brahms or Franz Schubert or Mozart or anybody. They're all keyboard players themselves, and you're playing the music they've written for themselves to play. But I wouldn't play an aria in a song recital.
Okay, thank you so much. One more question.
Good evening.
Evening.
I'm Alexander Jamalic. I'm a piano professor here, and I'm a fellow alumni at RCM as well.
Mm-hmm.
I have one short question. It's something that is very close to me. And since you are in London, and the person I'm interested in most, the pianist Nicola Medtner, he also lived in London. So have you come across his songs? And because he wrote many of them because his wife was a singer. So do you have any input? Because it's very interesting, as you said, that's really not something that you could play without a lot of skill. So have you ever come across with these songs? And
Yeah, of course I know who Nicholas Medtner is, and I know he lived in Finchley Road, which is about a mile from where I live. Yeah, Golders Green, yeah. But I don't know his songs very well, and I don't know his piano music very well. In fact, we were talking about this before. And it's something, I would say that one of the wonderful things about working in song is that you never, ever learn all the repertoire. I mean, I've probably played 300 Schubert songs, but that's only half of them. And it's the same with Medtner. He's a composer that I have yet to really properly discover. But I have colleagues and friends who are passionate about his music. But for me, at the moment, it's still something new. It'll be somebody I will explore and discover in the next few years.
I think it's worthwhile.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the recommendation. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It was a
Pleasure
having you here.
Thank you for your questions. Very good questions.